Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnave.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to remind you we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go to start that process. We offer a weekly writing community gathering on Zoom, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday and 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday. It's a gathering of writers from all over the world, and we spend some time generating writing, about 10 minutes. We also discuss it, talk about it, read it aloud, and then we go on our merry way. It only lasts an hour. Doors always open. We would love to have you. Today I'm going solo once again. I have a number of guests lined up. I do like these solo shows because it gives me a chance to visit with you and reflect on some of the things I'm thinking about. This is my last week in the Manila area. I'm in the Philippines. I've been here since October and been recording these shows here. I love to generate these shows from different places. Right now I'm in an Airbnb in Subic Bay, which is about 2 hours away from Manila. The Airbnb where we're staying is part of officers' quarters from the remains of the American military base that was here starting in 1899 after the Americans captured this area from the Spanish. Continuing on until 1991, when the Philippine government took it over. It's now Subic Bay Freeport Zone. And the buildings would look just like what you would expect. Kind of have a 1950s vibe. Flat, suburban, streets are wide, lots of commerce. It's kind of comfortable, really. It's warm. Last night we were sitting out back having a bit of bread and cheese. A cat walked by. Very suburban, really. We're here because my partner Tish has business here and we had to travel down for the day. So we came last night, enjoyed the evening, and now we're getting ready to drive back to Manila in the next couple of hours. All in all, a good trip. Like I said, I've been here for 4 months, a little longer. I'm getting ready to fly back to the States this coming Sunday, March the 9th. So I thought I would record this show as a way of reflecting on the last 4 months I've been here in Manila. So what I'd like to do is just tell a few stories around my experiences in this country, what it's like to be an American, somewhat expat for 4 months in an area that I'm becoming more and more familiar with. If you've ever spent any time outside of your home territory, you know that it takes a bit of adjustment. I've been coming in and out of Manila for the last 20 years, so I've had some adjustment already, and yet I haven't set the intention to be in this place for 4+ months. It's a very different vibe, 4 months versus 2 weeks or even 6 weeks. When I first started to come here, everything was dramatically unfamiliar. Traffic was the first thing I noticed that was dramatically unfamiliar to me. When I drive in the States, and if you drive in the States, you know what I'm talking about, things are orderly. You come to the stop sign, you turn right, you turn left. If somebody comes near you, you yield for them or they yield for you. Everything has its rules. Everything is orderly. And people don't really get too far afield. Now, in the States, you see some road rage. People do get upset. That is a problem in the States. But mostly, people stay in their lanes, and when they want to shift from the right lane to the left lane or left to right, they give a signal, wait, feather over, somebody eases off and the right lane appears and everybody's happy, or vice versa, the left lane appears and everybody's happy. When I first saw the traffic in Manila, I didn't understand it. It does not work like the driving traffic in the States, or for that matter in France, where I've driven before, and I've also driven in Ireland on the other side of the road. France, Ireland, U.S., they all have rules. Manila has its own rules as well, and yet those rules are rules that you might find in a flock of birds rather than on a busy highway. One of the best ways to describe the driving culture in Manila and in the Philippines, it's a yield culture. When you think about a flock of birds, say a murmuration of blackbirds, nobody really quite knows how the blackbirds avoid bumping into each other. Somehow they do. They all seem to know where to go, and they all fly in a flock, and the flock all moves as if it's a song, and each blackbird's a note, and they all move somehow. I don't know if they bump into each other or not. I've never seen blackbirds bumping into each other. Maybe they do. Maybe some clumsy, off-the-beam blackbird bumps into its neighbor. Hard to say. I have seen people bump into each other in Manila. That said, the comparison to the flock of blackbirds seems reasonable to me, because the flock of blackbirds works from the point of view of all of the blackbirds understanding when to yield, when to move, when to get out of the way of the other blackbirds so that the entire organism moves in one fashion. Same thing with traffic in Manila. It seems to have a yield sensibility. So, for example, if I'm driving in the States, say I'm in Taos and I'm getting ready to drive to town from Arroyo Seco, and I am at the stop sign at the youth hostel, fully stopped. I look both ways, right, left, nothing's coming. I pull out. No problem. Everybody's happy. In Manila, when you come to a stop sign, you don't wait until the traffic slows down to pull out. You come to the stop sign and you just pull out into the traffic, no matter whether somebody's coming your direction or not, no matter how many scooters are coming in your direction or not. You just pull out and you gauge the moment of entry based on a vibe more than a set of rules. The traffic seems to move over and somehow you fit in. Again, like the murmuration of blackbirds. The scooters here in Manila, and I've talked about this before on the show, I'm fascinated with the scooters. Thousands and thousands of scooters all over the place. You have Grab scooters. They deliver food. You have people on the back of scooters going places, using the scooters as taxis. You have scooters delivering things like batteries. People hauling things on scooters. Anything you can imagine, you can see on the back of a scooter. It's really quite interesting. And these scooter drivers go in and out of traffic as if the traffic didn't even exist, weaving back and forth. If there's a slight opening, they'll take that slight opening. They can miss a car by an inch as if it's no big deal at all. They somehow know exactly where that inch is and exactly how much space they have to slip through the openings, which are relatively tight. And yet they seem to know it. When I first started driving in Manila, I was really concerned about the scooters. I've got to avoid these. Oh my God, there's another scooter. I've got to avoid the scooter. I've got to watch out for all of the scooters. And that went on for a while until I realized there's no way to watch out for 1,000 scooters. There's absolutely no way to be sitting at an intersection during a rush hour evening with at least 300 or 400 scooters all lined up at the intersection, getting ready to just blast out as soon as the light turns green, and lined up on either side of the car. There's no way to watch for all of those scooters. And when the light turns green, off they go like drag racers at a big race, or the F1 racers coming out of the gate when they're getting ready to race the big F1 races. These scooters just zip along. And one day I realized I don't ever have to pay any attention to the scooters. Well, a little bit, but not a lot. Why? Because the scooters are so aware of me being one driver, as they are aware of all of the drivers. All I need to do in order to avoid having an encounter, negative encounter, which is to say having a scooter bump me or me bump a scooter. All I have to do is keep a steady pace. If I keep a steady pace, the scooters work around my car, aware that I exist within the context of all of the other cars. I'm existing within the context of the movement, the rhythm of the entire process, not an individual car. Once I realized that, I stopped worrying about the scooters. They really do zip by close, and occasionally you have more than what you would call a close call, and yet somehow they seem to miss. It's really quite fascinating. And it's also the same with other cars as well. People pull out in front of each other, and people give way because they pull out in front of each other. So the other thing that's different in Manila than in most of the parts of the States, except California, in LA, and maybe sometimes in San Francisco, certainly around Long Island on the Long Island Expressway, maybe in New Jersey during rush hour, and other bigger American cities like Denver and Chicago, rush hour traffic. People plod along. Same thing is true in Manila. It's even more intense in Manila because there's all of this pressure to get places and move places. And because there are so many people in Manila, I think Metro Manila has 13 million people. That's a lot of folks in rush hour, and they're all trying to get somewhere. You can imagine how thick the traffic is. Sometimes it takes an hour to make 2 miles. That seemed at first to me almost impossible. I will never be able to deal with this, I thought. But now that I've been driving in Manila and I have the rhythm of it, and I understand how it works, I adjust. So the time becomes the measure rather than the distance. I can walk 2 miles faster than I can drive 2 miles in Manila, and yet walking in Manila can be a bit haphazard. It can be a little rugged because the sidewalks in a lot of the areas aren't all that well developed. That said, in the business district, in the more upscale areas, the sidewalks are wide, the trees are beautiful. I'm here, as I said, in Subic Bay. Sidewalks are great, roads are wide, traffic is not as intense. So there are lots of characteristics around traffic everywhere. The Manila traffic has its own personality. So that's what one does in Manila to start acquiring the taste for Manila. What does it mean to acquire this taste? I get this idea from Tish's brother-in-law. Tish is the woman I've been with for 20 years. That's why I visit Manila. Paco Guerrero is his name. He's a photographer. He does a lot of work in Manila, journalistic work, advertising work, video work, etc. He's well acquainted with this area. And he said Manila is not for everybody. It is an acquired taste. People come here and they absolutely have no idea what to do. And eventually, if they stay long enough, they start to get a feel for it. I didn't think I would get a feel for Manila. And yet this trip, this 4 months, I have grown into the rhythms that exist here. I've come to understand what it means to acquire this taste. Beyond driving, what does it mean? One of the things I've noticed about Manila, the people I encounter smile, they bow their heads, they say hello, they're super friendly. A lot of the people in Tish's circle are international people. They've been all over the world. So when I'm having a conversation with these folks, they're referencing global things as much as local things. I have started to walk more in Manila. I was quite hesitant about that at first, mostly because it's always hot. And I thought, I can't walk in the heat. Now, here I am restricting myself. I can't walk in the heat, I say. The middle of the day is too hot. And it is too hot. Actually, the lowest temperature ever recorded in Manila was 1917. And the lowest temperature, it broke a record. The record low was 59 degrees. So it's hot. You can imagine that. Never gets below 59 degrees. And yet somehow I have adjusted. And I have started walking more. A lot of people say, and you probably know this to be true, if you have been in any situation where you wanted to become familiar with an area, you walk it. If you live in Asheville, you walk around Asheville. You see it in a different way than if you were to drive. Same thing in Taos. If you walk through the plaza and you walk around downtown Taos, you get to know the vibe of the town. Here we are, Manila. I have walked a great deal while I'm in Manila, and I have really come to appreciate the rhythm of the walking, which I've talked about already on this show a couple of times in the past 2 or 3 weeks. I've also mentioned that I've been wearing merino wool t-shirts. Surprise, surprise. I thought merino wool was only for cold weather. I've learned when I wear a merino wool thin t-shirt, it keeps me dry all the time. It works really well in the 90-degree heat to keep me cool, and when I'm inside in air conditioning, it works well to keep me warm. And you may notice right now some background noise. When I first started recording this, I was in Subic Bay, and since then I left Subic Bay. We traveled back to Manila. I've now walked down to a coffee shop called Single Origin. I'm sitting in a corner waiting to meet some poets from the local performance poetry scene, and I'm recording this show in this little coffee shop. There's a lot of background noise. The microphone I'm using is a call center headset microphone rig that blocks out a fair amount of the noise, and yet you still get some of the background noise, which you can hear in the background. I'm fine with that. I hope you are too. The goal of this podcast, this radio show, this time, my visit with you, is just to reflect on my final days in Manila before I come back to the States. And part of that is finding myself in coffee shops. Sometimes they're understated, not so loud. Other times they're loud, depending on the people that are around me. This is a business gathering area, and I am in now a business district near Power Plant Mall. It's where all of the people come to do their work every day. Office workers, managers, CEOs, that sort of vibe. So I'm in the corner waiting for the poets to come. As it turns out, there's a fairly active spoken word poet scene here in Manila, and the fellow I'm meeting is Leonardo Reyes. He's the leader of the community. They have a third Thursday event every third Thursday. Poets get together and read, just like they do all over the world. I've been to a couple of those, and I've enjoyed the way he MCs and shepherds the newcomers through. So Leonardo and I are meeting because I am interested in talking to him about making some connections with the poetry scene here in the Philippines and with Leaf Global Arts. Leaf Global Arts, of course, is based in Asheville, as I've mentioned many times, and they have a Culture Keeper program that works around the world, and the idea is to find a leader who is doing some kind of work artistically on a local basis to keep the culture of the area alive. So most of the poetry is done in the local language, Tagalog, and I'm really interested in talking to Leonardo about how we can reach out into the different areas, the different towns, different villages where the poetry scenes are happening, and start to cultivate the poets from those scenes and possibly develop a few people who would be interested in coming to the Leaf Global Arts Retreat, which happens every May, or the Leaf Festival, which happens every October. So it's my hope that we will be able to bring some of the Filipino spoken word poets to perform on the Leaf stage. So I have about an hour before we meet, so I'm recording this show in this cafe. Since this show airs on community radio, how much more community-centered can I get than sitting in a cafe, no matter where I am in the world? So I'd like to now turn my attention back to my time in Subic Bay for a moment. When we first arrived, we went out to lunch. Went to a little area that was a half car wash, half little cafe with outside tables. We were sitting there having our lunch, drinking a bit of coffee, and some young students from the local navigational school showed up. They had their uniforms on, bright red shirts, quite nice, and they were just as happy as they could be. They came in, made their orders, went outside, and sat at the tables in front of the cafe. I didn't give it another thought. They seemed to be having a great time chatting, after-school conversations, a little bit of gossip, I suppose. Suddenly, I heard a scream. I looked out the window, and all the students had jumped up from their tables and were moving away from where they had been sitting. And it was an odd sight because not only were they moving away from where they'd been sitting, but they seemed to be taking pictures with their smartphones as they backed up. Wonder what's going on, I thought. So, of course, I grabbed my smartphone because I thought maybe there would be a photo opportunity. And sure enough, I looked out the window, and what did I see? That this huge 40-pound monkey eating their cakes, slightly growling at the students, clearly aggressive. I want to say hogging the whole table, but since it was a monkey, I guess I should have to say he was monkeying the whole table. I did a little research, and these monkeys are called long-tail macaque monkeys. And this monkey was about 40 pounds. He was as big as a medium-sized dog. And I couldn't help but take a picture. I actually did end up getting a great picture. And what I wanted to do was go out and get close to the monkey. And I learned later that if you look at a monkey eye to eye, the monkey considers that an aggressive act. And Tish also warned me, don't go out there and get near the monkey. The monkey might bite you. The monkey might have rabies. The monkey might carry other diseases. So foolish me, I was getting ready to go out there and talk to the monkey, look the monkey in the eye, make a connection. Duh. Somehow I had enough sense to not go out there, and I shot my photo from the window of the cafe while I was looking at the monkey, and it did turn out to be a pretty good photo. Then I looked out the other window, and I saw 3 or 4 more monkeys, little monkeys, looking up at me, all staring, and I stared back at them. Now I know they were all mad at me because I was being aggressive towards them. And then when I finally went out to see if the monkey was still out there, keeping my distance, of course, I looked over to the edge of the parking lot, and all of the monkeys were gathered under the trees at the edge of the parking lot. I've since learned that when you go to Subic Bay and you go to some of these areas where you have outdoor dining like that, you will likely encounter these monkeys, and they're strategic. So one monkey will divert you while the other monkey will come to your table and grab your food. I've also read stories about how ravens in grocery store parking lots will employ the same diversion strategies. One will get your attention while the other grabs your chicken from your grocery bag. So I'm not so sure how smart I am compared to those monkeys and those ravens. I'd like to think I'm somewhat intellectual. Even so, I was almost ready to fall for the monkey's ploy and go out there and engage the blasted monkey. Anyway, it's a great story. I'm smiling while I'm telling it, and I do enjoy having encounters like that, and I can be a little foolish. As much as I understand about how things can go off the porch and take everybody on the porch into the woods and we all get lost, I still sometimes tend to step off the porch and chase the monkey around just because I think I can be friends with the monkey. Fortunately, I got a good picture. No bites. The monkey ended up eating all the cakes. The students left. What remained was a messy table and this story that I'm telling you now. That parking lot definitely belonged to those monkeys, and I'm sure they're there right now, and they're looking at somebody's table, getting ready to sneak up and grab another piece of pie. So what have I learned in the last 4 months being here in Manila? I've learned that dental work is much less expensive in Manila than it is in Taos, New Mexico, or Asheville, North Carolina. I can speak from experience because I've had dental work done in Asheville, and I have had dental work done in Taos. Mostly I get my teeth cleaned twice a year, and that's enough, but occasionally some cavities appear. I do have a few crowns, and occasionally the crowns will wear down. After a while, they do start to break down. In fact, I bring that up because I did have a crown that needed to be replaced, and the dentist that I have in Taos gave me a quote of $1,200 for the crown replacement. And there's nothing wrong with the dental offices in Taos. They're perfectly professional and get the job done. But my dentist did caution me when I said I planned to have the crown replaced in Manila. My dentist said, be very careful over there. You never know how good the work is going to be. The tone was a tad ominous, if you know what I'm saying. And of course, anywhere you go, you can find somebody who will do shoddy work. I knew, however, here in Manila, the dentists are dramatically well trained. They could not be more professional, polished, modern, highly functional. The dentist, young, well trained. So when I called the dental office to make my appointment, I was told, no problem, come in 2 days and we can take care of you. I went in 2 days later. I had my teeth checked out. I had a cleaning. I had x-rays and a complete professional consultation around what I needed to do next. The total cost for all of this great service was $80 American. One cleaning in Taos is around $130. If you throw in a consultation and x-rays, you're knocking around $225, maybe $250 after it's all said and done. The dentist here in Manila said, sure, we can replace your crown. It looks like it needs replacement. I said, well, how long will it take to have this done? How much will it cost? He said, your new crown will cost around $600 or $700. Go ahead and make an appointment for next week, and when you come back, we will get it all squared away, give you a temporary crown, and in a week, your permanent crown will be back. You can return, we'll put it in, and off you go. So that's exactly what I did, and sure enough, I ended up with a new crown. I ended up with some other cavities filled and other dental work done during that second and third visit. And I think the total cost for me was around $750. Had I had the same job done in Taos or in Asheville, it would have been around $1,800 to $2,000, maybe more for the same service. I understand that in the States it's more expensive to do business. I'm actually not shining a negative light on the dental services in Taos or in Asheville. I'm just saying that if you want to have a vacation and come somewhere like Manila, you can get your dental work done for over half the price, pay for the whole trip, and have a little bit of money left over. I also understand this is a little easier said than done, especially if you have children, you have jobs. You've got to get to the dentist in the morning and get back to work in the afternoon. I also understand that sometimes you can be led astray by people anywhere. I just happen to have some contacts in Manila that led me to the right dentist. I'm sure if I'd walked into another office somewhere in Manila, I might not have had the same experience. Even so, it's worth shopping around, and I'm glad to have found a dentist who could help me out while I've been here in Manila for the past 4 months. As the time has passed, I've started to notice how much I've adjusted to being in this area. The heat hasn't bothered me all that much. I've been driving a lot, and I've adjusted to the rhythm of the road. The way the traffic moves is more like a river flowing or birds flying than it is linear driving like we do in the States. One thing that has surprised me most about being here is how the younger people defer to the people who are older. There's definitely a culture of respect around people over 50. I've yet to have anyone in a restaurant be snarky to me. They're very patient. They say, hello, sir. How are you? Welcome, sir. Thank you very much. I say hello. Thank you very much as well. So it goes back and forth. I also now have an alien certificate of registration, which designates me as a tourist. It's an official government ID, which allows for a 20% senior discount and a 12% VAT tax discount. So I can get 30% off of anything I have in a restaurant. And it's because the culture has a respect for the elders. Now, I admit, I've not thought of myself all that much as an elder, and yet I suppose I am as much of an elder as anyone else in their 70s. So it's really nice, actually, to experience that kind of respect. So there was a time when I resisted people calling me sir. Now I understand what it means. Hello, sir. Welcome, sir. And I often will say back to the person speaking to me, thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. And I often place my right hand near my heart when I say thank you, bow my head a little. And it's amazing at how that gesture gets traction here. Folks often put their hands on their hearts and bow back as well. So it's a sign of respect. It's a sign of acknowledging the humanity. It's also a sign of saying all is well in the world right now. And as I've been here for a while, I've started to make connections with different people. I met a fellow not from here. He's actually living in Wellington, New Zealand. His name is Sean Williams. He's a journalist. He produces a weekly podcast with his creative collaborator, Danny Gold, also a journalist. The podcast is called The Underworld Podcast. I sent Sean an email because I had a tip for one of the shows that he was doing on Adnan Khashoggi. And you have something to look forward to because earlier today I did a radio interview with Sean, and I plan to air that next week, so I hope you can tune in. So to give you an idea of where Danny Gold and Sean Williams are coming from, here's the first paragraph from their website, Underworld. From ISIS insurgents to MS-13 hitmen, Nigerian traffickers to Indian dons, Danny Gold and Sean Williams have met a lot of shady people in the past decade or so. Underworld brings their investigative work and excellent sense of humor together in one slapdash, hastily edited podcast. Each week, this transatlantic pair dives into a different gang, boss, or warlord, charting their route to infamy and the systems that allow them to flourish. I can think of no better place to read a paragraph like that than where I am right now in this little corner in this loud coffee shop, looking out on the passing day. So when I reached out to Sean to pass my tip along to him, I told him I was in Manila. He said he would be there in a week or so. We arranged for lunch. We had lunch. I enjoyed my conversation with him, learned a lot more about what he was up to as a successful podcaster, and also I was most particularly interested in what he was bringing to the table as an investigative journalist. We enjoyed each other's company. We went to an art fair afterwards, spent the afternoon together. He, Tish, and I wandered around, got to know each other. Then he went on his way to do other work. And a few days later, he and I got together again with Tish's brother-in-law, Paco Guerrero, and we had a buddy lunch, the three of us. Sean's a journalist, Paco's a photographer and somewhat of a journalist. I'm a poet. I like the idea of journalism. I like the idea of being alive in the world, looking around at things. I love the idea of trying to understand why this world that we live in, this complicated, seemingly very dangerous world that is so layered, that works in some of the oddest ways that I can ever imagine. I am just curious about how it works. I know I will never understand it. I know that I can do thousands and thousands of podcasts. I can talk to millions of people. I'm still only going to scratch the surface. Even so, I'm interested in it. And so sitting there with Paco and with Sean, just talking about the meanderings of things in Manila, the contrast, gave me more of a sense of my place in the world. And hopefully, with this podcast, me taking some creative risks to record it in a loud cafe rather than trying to get it all right all the time, will add some insight to your life. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know, but I'm willing to take that chance because I think that's what we have to do as creative people, as artists, if you want to even call this artistry. This is maybe more showing up, doing something, for God's sakes. Just take some kind of action to move things along, not only with yourself, but with the others around you. That's exactly what I'm doing, sitting here in this corner. And guess what? The two poets I'm here to meet have just arrived. So I'm going to pause my recording right now and have a meeting with them, and I'll get back with you as soon as the meeting is over and give you a report on what they tell me. So now I'm returning to the recording 2 hours later. Like I said, it was a meeting, and yet it was more than a meeting. It was really a gathering of three people, all with the same agenda, and the agenda we brought to the table was the sensibilities that we all three had around how to create areas, create places where people can show up and engage poetically from the point of view of the oral tradition, using poetry as the art form paired with the spoken word to make something that's meaningful for the people who listen. To give you a little bit of background around where Leonardo and Danny were coming from, a month and a half ago, on the third Thursday of January, I had an opportunity to attend their spoken word open mic venue, which was located in a building called Globe Tower in the business district called BGC. The Manila Poets have a relationship with Globe Tower, and Globe Tower donates a fairly large room for their monthly events. They also have other events, writing events, storytelling events, academic events, performance events, including the third Thursday, which is when poets get together and read their work aloud. So when I went on the third Thursday of January, I had no expectations. I've been to lots of poetry readings. I have worked with poets and writers for years, and I've seen the range from people stumbling around, not knowing what they're doing, trying to find their footing, to very polished performers who could be on Broadway. And in fact, I did go to Def Poetry Jam on Broadway and watch 6 performance poets do a full 2-hour Broadway show based on their work. It was directed, it was polished, highly rehearsed, and the audience packed the house, and the show ran for 6 months, maybe it ran for a year, quite a while for poetry. And so the range for spoken word can be anything from the clumsy, shy person who barely is able to project the voice into the microphone on stage, to a fully rehearsed rock and roll performance poetry show like the one Def Poetry Jam illustrated on stage in New York, or like the National Poetry Slam Championships I've seen so many times in different venues throughout America. So when I attended Third Thursday here in Manila, I was expecting something okay, something interesting. Wasn't really expecting a whole lot of sophistication because I had been told the poets were just getting their spoken word momentum started here in Manila. They were just starting to experiment with it. Well, I walked into the room and what I found was something very different. Microphones were in place, a good sound system, poets were practicing in the corner, a few of the poets had guitars. I saw a laboratory. I saw an experimental space, an artistic, poetic, experimental space. The poets had a screen behind them. They had cameras in place. I knew right away this was not some beginning experiment with a few poets trying to figure out what to do. This was an advanced poetic community exploring the poetic nature of what they all brought to the stage. And so I went back a second time, and it was exactly the same. Experimental, 100 people in the room. The house was packed as far as I was concerned. I suppose you could have sold a few more tickets, but wall-to-wall people, probably 100 folks in this room, and the room could handle that many. Enough seats, enough room for all these people to watch, to be there, to enjoy the spoken word, to enjoy the poetry, to enjoy the music. And there were a number of people who raised their hands saying this is the first time they've ever been to a venue like this. They've never seen it before. So that told me there were people coming from the community to experience this. I saw a group with momentum. So that night I talked to the fellow who was the main organizer, Leonardo Reyes, and he was fantastic on stage, a professional. Had a musical range, had a poetic range. He was delivering his poetry in Tagalog as well as in English. Tagalog is the language spoken here in the Philippines. And people really enjoyed what he was doing. What I noticed about his leadership, he was open to receiving everybody on stage. While he had what I considered star qualities, very, very charismatic, he made room for everybody to have their own charisma as well. And that, to me, was a sign of good leadership as well as someone who could carry the spoken word performance traditions around poetry out of small groups in Manila into the larger community. And Manila is a town of 13 million people. So when I say larger, I'm talking about fairly big numbers. And as I learned from Leonardo, he is interested in carrying this idea throughout the whole country. So he's not just thinking of one small venue. He's connecting with universities. He's connecting with other people in other areas. He wants the spoken word poetry scene to grow and thrive in Manila. And I couldn't resist it. I said, let's have a coffee. Join me at Single Origin near the Power Plant Mall and let's meet for a while. I had no idea we would have a full 2 hours talking all the way. So that's what just happened. And when Danny and Leonardo showed up, he sat down, had his backpack. He opened his backpack, took out his microphones, mic'd me up, and said, I'm going to record this because I want to know the history of the spoken word in America. I don't know as much about it as I would like to, so I want to know more. So 2 hours ago, Danny and Leonardo started asking me questions about how the spoken word movement in America started. So there I was, sitting in the cafe looking at Danny and Leonardo, thinking, well, what in the world can I tell these people to give them some kind of background around what I know? I know a fair amount about it because I started working in the spoken word business, if you will, or the poetry business in 1984 when I did my first live spoken word show with a group I co-founded called Poetry Alive, and my creative collaborator at the time, Bob Falls, and I put together a 2-hour spoken word performance poetry show using traditional poems from the school textbook to create the theater piece. We were in a sense doing what Russell Simmons later did with Def Poetry Jam on Broadway, although the difference between the Broadway show and ours was dramatic because neither Bob nor I had any experience doing this. So we compensated for lack of experience by getting a theater director and working 6 months to make the show happen. So by the time we walked on the stage, we had a fairly good sense of what we wanted to do. Even so, we didn't have much stage experience, so being on the stage for the first time, trying to carry a 2-hour show, certainly taught me a lot about what I needed to learn, and I went on to learn it. I'm still learning it even to this day. So when Leonardo and Danny asked me to share my knowledge, I had a fairly decent platform to start from. What I wanted to do in that short time frame I had regarding the historical references, I wanted them to know and to understand they were doing something really important in Manila. I told them that I had witnessed an experimental situation that I very seldom see. People were devoted in a way that few communities are truly devoted. It was a collective thing coming from the poets of Manila. And while Danny and Leonardo were thinking they were a bit removed from it all, I wanted to emphasize, and I think I succeeded in emphasizing this, that they were not removed at all. They were functioning in a grand tradition that had been going on for a long time. And I also told them that because they were not as aware of all of the things that had been going on historically in the States, they didn't have as much pressure to conform to what they thought they were supposed to do. As a result, they were experimenting with their own styles in a way that was paying off for them, drawing the audiences in, giving people the permission to be who they wanted to be on stage, rather than referencing, say, maybe the beat poets or the slam poets or the bohemian poets who all gathered at the Gaslight Cafe on McDougal Street in the West Village during the 1960s. Allen Ginsberg was there, Bob Dylan showed up, etc., etc., etc. I wanted Leonardo and Danny to understand that they were functioning within the context of these kinds of traditions because they were in Manila, removed from them in a sense. They were able to invent their own forms, which reminded me of perhaps the experimental times, Gaslight Cafe, in the 1960s. I said, listen, my friends, it's 2025. We are in a very disruptive time, and you all have an opportunity because you're building from the interior out, taking fewer cues than many. You have an opportunity to really offer something up that maybe people haven't seen before. And while they were somewhat familiar with the history, they didn't really have a sense of how it all tied together. So that was my goal sitting there at the table. I wanted to give them a sense of where they fit into this broader historical context. So I started by saying Bob Falls and I performed our poetry show in 1984 at McDib's in Black Mountain. I then tied that to our experience with the Poetry Slam and Poetry Alive. By 1991, we started doing the Poetry Slam. I also gave them some background on the Taos Poetry Circus and the Taos Heavyweight Poetry Bout. I told them about how Chicago was the fertile place for the Poetry Slam when Mark Smith invented the Poetry Slam along with other creative collaborators in Chicago during the 80s. I referenced everything that was going on in New York at the time. which included Bob Holman and the New Eurekan Poets Cafe and other people as well. I also mentioned that at that same time, the hip-hop movement was starting to gain traction. The early days, this was back in the early 80s, and so everything was just starting to coalesce. I then tied it to Shakespeare and Company in Paris. Shakespeare and Company was the bookstore founded by George Whitman after World War II. All of the luminaries gathered there to read their work, and they were hanging out in the poet cafes of Paris. Lawrence Ferlinghetti in San Francisco doing the same thing. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, George Whitman, both were very close friends. They paired City Lights Bookstore in San Francisco with the Paris scene, Shakespeare and Company, in Paris. I also mentioned Black Mountain College, which is an important factor in all of this because many of the cultural influencers, poets, dancers, artists, actors, were cross-pollinating between Black Mountain College and the scene in Paris. And this was also during the time when the beatniks and the bohemians were in the East Village and the West Village experimenting in New York City. So a lot of the Black Mountain College people were traveling from Black Mountain to New York City to Paris, and some of them were overlapping in Taos at the Mabel Dodge Lujan house as well. Mabel Dodge Lujan came from the Gertrude Stein crowd in Paris, traveled to Taos in the early 1900s, and established her salon there. The Taos Poetry Circus came much later. There's a lot of action coming out of Taos even to this day around the spoken word movement and, of course, the artistic momentum that all of the artists in Taos have right now. So the original reason Danny and Leonardo wanted to meet with me was because they wanted me to give them some background on the Poetry Slam. It was very difficult for me to give background on the Poetry Slam and leave out all of these other connections. I brought in Black Mountain College because the Poetry Slam that I host now at the Leaf Festival in the fall under the umbrella of Leaf Global Arts is the Poetry Slam that we were hosting in 1992 at the Green Door in Asheville. The Poetry Slam scene that we started in 1992 kept its momentum up throughout the 90s, then waned quite a bit in the 2000s. Poetry performance, spoken word, storytelling remained in Asheville. It just did not remain in the form that we created for the Poetry Slam in the early days between 1992 and, say, maybe 1999 or so, almost 2000. The seeds were planted, the momentum continued, and now when you go to Asheville, you will see poets, writers performing. It's a big center for writing. The Story Parlor on Haywood Road in West Asheville hosts a lot of writing. I'm still running the Poetry Slam. At the Leaf Festival, Warren Wilson College has an MFA program. The pockets run really deep in Asheville. The Asheville Poetry Review by Keith Flynn is there. Luke Hankins has Horizon Books Publishing. Nicole Brown is hosting the Hellbender Gathering of Poets in the fall of 2025. The name Hellbender comes from the Hellbender salamander, which is an indicator species that serves as a measure of environmental conditions in a given area. And since Leonardo and Danny were really interested in the Poetry Slam, I continue to focus on the Leaf Poetry Slam, which is the one that I host, and I also tied the Leaf Poetry Slam back to Black Mountain College because the Leaf Festival and the Leaf Global Arts Retreat both take place on the former campus of Black Mountain College, and much of what Leaf Global Arts is about now is carrying on the many experiments in education that were inspired by lots of what the Black Mountain College students and faculty were doing. Black Mountain College started in 1993 at Blue Ridge Assembly. In the late 40s, it moved to Lake Eden. It closed in 1955 or 56. When the college closed, many of the students and the faculty scattered about the country. A lot of them went to New York and continued to do their work there. So my goal, sitting here in this little corner where I'm still sitting, talking to Leonardo and Danny, my goal was to give them a sense they're doing something that is connected to a greater historical perspective than just a few spoken word poets in a medium-sized room in the business district in BGC. I also told Leonardo and Danny to separate poetry from spoken word. Poetry is the art form that's created on the page. Poetry is then spoken aloud, and the spoken word part is the delivery system. You can speak anything you like, and it's spoken word. If you pair it with poetry that you've written, that's crafted well, that you've worked on, that becomes spoken word poetry. You can take the spoken out, and the poetry still stands. So the poem can operate on the page, or if you decide to speak it, then it becomes a spoken word piece of art. Speaking it is a different kind of art discipline than writing it. When you pair the two together, you have a collaboration between voice and page, from stage to page, as Taylor Mali, one of the poets who now lives in New York, often refers to it as, and other people do as well. So as we move to the end of our time together, which is getting close, my primary goal with Leonardo was to start a conversation with him about becoming a Leaf Global Arts culture keeper in the Philippines. He has a big vision for this area in Manila, this area that I'm looking out on now. I am in the business district. It's where all of the business takes place. There's a fair amount of money here, maybe even to say a lot of money. Elsewhere in the area, not so much. People are looking for opportunities. They're looking for education. And you can go out from Manila to all the other towns around all the islands in the Philippines. There are people there who tell stories. What Leonardo would like to do is to cultivate those storytellers, those poets. Let them use the Tagalog language, the other dialects. I don't know how many dialects are spoken in the Philippines. There are many. So the poets speak in many different dialects. Leonardo wants to keep those cultures alive within the framework of the poetic sensibilities that he has come to love and that he represents. So I proposed a conversation with him about becoming the representative in the Philippines for Leaf Global Arts. So we can cross-pollinate there as well. So here we have all of the ties going back to Mabel Dodge Lujan House and Gertrude Stein and Black Mountain College, the beat poets in Paris and New York, all over the place, Chicago Slam, Asheville Poetry Slam, all of the poets. Where are the poets? They're right here, as my good friend Alan Wolfe says, and continues to say. Are you a poet? If you're a poet, and I ask you the question, where are the poets? You can raise your hand and say, I am right here. Leonardo raising his hand saying, I am right here. What do we do with right here in 2025? We show up. We make our art. We're responsible for the first ripple in the lake, and after that, the lake takes over and ripples our ripple out with all of the other ripples. We lose track of who made the first ripple or the second or who made any of them, but we can look out on the lake and we can see them. So when they left just a few minutes ago, and I came back to this recording here in this little cafe, Single Origin, in downtown Manila, Makati area, around Rockwell and Power Plant Mall. I was feeling very excited about what had happened, and I'm so glad to still be able to play a role in moving all of these things along collectively. Nobody will know who did what 100 years from now, and yet much of what goes on now will stay, no different than what happened in the 50s with all of the poets in New York, Black Mountain College, Gertrude Stein in Paris, George Whitman at Shakespeare and Company, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, moving into the 90s, all of the slam poets, all of the ones that I knew, the ones in Asheville, the ones everywhere. We're here. It's now. It's time for us to continue doing what we do, and what we do is show up and make our art happen in whatever form that is. So I encourage you to participate wherever you are in the world. Lean into what you do. Have the confidence that you are part of a bigger movement that's been going on for a long time, and your voice counts. and your opinion counts, and what you have to say counts. And that goes for everyone listening, no matter how you view the world, no matter what your political inclination is. If you have something to say, stand up and say it. And those who need to hear it will hear it and do with it what they want. And some of it may well endure. We do not know what will and won't endure, but we know some will. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for enduring with me till the end of this show. I really do appreciate it. And you have been listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM. Thank you, Robin Collier, for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnave.com. I would love to know what you think about all the stuff that I've been talking about. Does this have value? Would you like to hear more? Do these solo shows work, or do you want me to continue more focus on the interview shows? If you're listening, I would love to know about that, and I would appreciate it if you would send me an email, Navé at jamesnave.com, and tell me about that. Last reminder, we're always sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go to start that process. So, once again, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you do come back sometime soon. And until then, maybe I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.